Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. Thank you very much for the support. Really appreciate it. If you find any of this information useful in any way whatsoever, either for yourself or for someone else that you know, please feel free to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of the videos that we post. Today's topic is actually really interesting because it's one that's affected me personally. So some of the things that I'm going to be sharing today are not from generic information and research that we usually pick up, but it's actually from personal experience. So I'm going to make a confession today. Sorry, guys, but hey ho. So the topic today is handling criticism without shutting down. Now, this is the difference between ego and feedback, just seeing the difference between the two and seeing what we can do about it. Now, as I've mentioned before, this is the BVOY channel. This is a channel where we talk about how to be the best version of yourself. And as part of that, this is information that you can use either in your leadership role, at work, it can use in business, but you can also use for yourself as a person individually, even if you don't have a role somewhere up a corporate ladder or anything like that. So some of this information is going to be beneficial to you anyway, even if you don't actually have a team that you lead. We all go through periods where we receive criticism, and no one likes the concept of criticism. And the reason we don't is because we attach it to our ego. And this is what we're going to be talking about today, how to detach between ego and feedback and seeing what we can do about it. Now, I'm going to start off with a bit of a story, which is why I said this is going to be a personal one. When I was in high school, I come from Zimbabwe, and when I was in high school, there's a football game that we played, football, soccer, depending where you're watching this from. We played against a team that we were expecting to beat us terribly because they were known to be really good. And I was playing as a striker. In the whole game, now reflecting, I didn't play very well. I really didn't play very well. But in the whole game, in the first half, we were losing 1-0. And just before the halftime mark, I had an opportunity to score, and I did. And I actually had a really nice shot, which is a one-off rare moment in that whole game where I did something right. I had a shot and I actually scored. So when we went into halftime, it was 1-1. Now, with my pride and feeling like I've done something amazing, when we went to sit down with the manager as a team so that we can get some advice on what to do going forward, I sat right at the front because I was expecting to get great feedback. Now, I remember this like it was yesterday, and bear in mind, this was probably over 25 years ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. My manager looked at me and said, "Young man, you are useless." Oh, that hurt so much because not only was I not expecting it, but my peers at the time found it absolutely hilarious. And I'll be honest with you, if I were them, I would find it funny too, because they noticed that I actually went to sit at the front expecting to get some good feedback, and I got criticism instead. That hurt. Absolutely hurt. And it kind of touches on what we're going to be talking about today. And if some of you guys relate to something like that, this is probably going to be good for you. So essentially, handling criticism without shutting down requires you to actually separate your personal self-worth from the objective output. So essentially what really hurt me at that time is because I attached my self-worth with the outcome. My self-worth, me being told that I was useless, became a personal attack. What he was trying to express is that I wasn't playing very well. What was going on the pitch was not going the way that he was hoping for. It wasn't going to the expectations of my capabilities. Now, how it was delivered could be contested, but ultimately, I attached it to my self-worth, and that really hit my confidence hard. No surprise that the rest of the game, I didn't play well either, and we lost the game anyway. But it's about separating your personal self-worth with the objective outcome. Now, this is not an easy thing to do. I have to admit, it's not an easy thing to do. It's not a switch that you can just go for it and take someone's feedback as feedback rather than criticism and detach yourself from your personal self-worth. Now, we're going to go through some of the things that you can identify on which is ego, which one is feedback, and maybe you can start utilizing some of these to actually actually decipher between the two and take actions toward looking at things as feedback rather than criticism. So the first one is the ego itself. When we're talking about ego, the ego seeks protection and it seeks validation. It also seeks to look at current perfection. And by current perfection, it means right now you are perfect as you are. So if someone says anything otherwise, anything that goes away from you being perfect as you are, it feels personal. It feels like a personal attack. How dare you say that because I'm great as I am? I mean, no one actually prefers to say that, to say I'm perfect or I'm great, but we feel it inside. That's what the ego tells us, that we are currently perfect as we are. So if anyone gives you any feedback that doesn't line up with that, it hurts. Young man, you are useless hurts because my ego tells me I'm perfect. My ego tells me that I'm doing absolutely fantastic. That's the ego. That's what it's looking for. Essentially, it interprets critique of your work as direct attack on your character. And that's no surprise that when people get feedback or feedback that doesn't line up with what their expectations are, they find it very painful and they want to retaliate. Now, in contrast, feedback or the growth mindset, growth way of looking at what you're actually receiving without looking at it as criticism, is the growth orientated mindset seeks data. It seeks evolution and it seeks long-term skill refinement. It's a long-term skill refinement. You cannot refine your skill if you don't get feedback about where you're lacking. So the growth mindset actually encourages that kind of feedback. It's great to be told that you're good at something, but you cannot improve unless you're told where you're not so good. So the growth mindset, it views flaws as not as permanent identity traits, but as temporary variables that can be modified. And that's the best way to be looking at it. And as I mentioned at the start, guys, this is not an easy thing to do. It is not an easy thing to do. It's easier said than done, I admit. But that's the fact. That's what's actually important. Now, what I want to point out is certain things that you can use to identify when you are actually starting to shut down. Now, you may actually identify some of these on yourself, but then these are cues that pick up when you are actually shutting down. This is when you're actually starting to take things personally. This is when the ego is shouting at you. So one of the things are physical cues. Physical cues is when you start feeling tightness in your chest and shallow breathing, and you're starting to have a bit of a frozen posture. Now, these are postures where you feel like you're actually getting to hold yourself, physically holding yourself, or creating a fist within yourself, and you're kind of freezing and tensing up. That's your physical cue that you're taking criticism and your ego is screaming. And the other one is mental cues. So this is where you're thinking, I can't do anything right. And you're plotting a counterattack because you're starting to feel like this criticism is an attack on you. And you're starting to plot in the back of your mind how you're going to counterattack the attack that you're feeling right now. And the last one is a behavioral cue. This is when you use what's called monosyllabic. It's a difficult word to say. The monosyllabic answers where it's just very short, straight to the point, yes, no, okay, and you don't want to speak for too long, and you don't keep eye contact either. These are the behavioral cues that show that your ego is screaming out loud at you right now, and it wants to fight back because you want to get away from there as quickly as possible. Now, if you identify some of these as your cues or things that you do when you're receiving feedback, then know that it's actually your ego screaming out at you. And in that situation, if you're feeling that way, you're most likely not going to learn anything. The likelihood is you're going to want to fight back and you'll end up staying where you are. Let's identify these and let's not see these as things that can't be changed, because it shows from scientific evidence, it shows that you can actually change the way that you receive this information. Bear in mind, there's one thing, receiving criticism to a certain extent, that's hard to take. And that's something that you need to work on. There's also another issue where the criticism itself or the feedback, how it is delivered, can also play a big part, because you might be able to get some good feedback delivered terribly, and that still feels like a personal attack. And all of those things, even if it makes it more difficult to, you can still handle that and take that as feedback for your growth. Now, I want to go through 5 steps on a step-by-step blueprint of processing critique or processing this criticism and seeing what it is that we can potentially do about it to try to improve ourselves in a certain extent. The first one is buy time with a pause. And we spoke about this in videos before. Feel free to look through the channel. But then it's very important to get a trigger and pause rather than feel the need to respond pretty much straight away. Pause, breathe, have a think about it. Now, the concept of breathing is very, very useful in this point, because when you have that trigger and you have a spike in an emotion, if you react or act whilst the emotion is really high, you're most likely going to regret whatever it is that you do or say. So let that spike go up, breathe, and bring it back down so that you can actually think through how you're going to respond, not react. So the first thing is buy time with the pause. Number 2 is separate identity from output. So as we mentioned earlier on, you need to try by all means to separate your personal self-worth from the objective output. What they're saying is based on what has happened and what it is that's been done, not you. So when that manager was saying, I am useless, they're talking about the act on a football pitch, not my personal worth. It's not me as a person, which I can end up labeling on every other aspect of my life. They were talking about the fact that my performance on the football pitch was not good enough. And that's where that was coming from. Trying by all means to separate that identity from the output is very important. Number 3, separate the tone from the truth. This one is the one that's very difficult. And I mentioned earlier on that sometimes one thing is the feedback that you get. The second thing is how the feedback is delivered. Some people deliver good feedback in a terrible way. Tone is high. You can hear the frustration in what they're saying, and they're giving you good feedback, but it's delivered in a really terrible way. So now it becomes a bit of your responsibility to a certain extent to discern between their tone of voice and the truth. Pick out the truth out of it and then try to ignore the tone of voice. I admit, very difficult thing to do, but understanding that there's a difference between how they're delivering it and the words that they're actually using. Take out what is helpful to you and use that for growth rather than fight back the frustration and ignore the truth that they're actually speaking. Number 4, shift into curious detective role. Right, curious detective role. This is when you're actually starting to ask more. After doing the pause that we spoke about at the start and letting the spike of that feeling go up and come back down so that you can start responding, this actually allows you to ask questions. Tell me more. Which part about that particular act did you think wasn't quite good enough? What do you think I could have done different? So now you're actually looking at the detail and taking away the identity. In that scenario of the story that I told you, where I was told that I was useless, in that particular situation, if it was a one-to-one, perhaps we could have had a conversation and said, which part of the game do you think I can improve on? Which part of the game, which part of what I did do you think was not good enough? And how do you think I can actually improve on that? Now we're speaking about the detail of the context of why they think I was useless. And it actually takes away from the identity, because if I felt that being useless became an identity, that means I'll become a useless brother, I'll become a useless child, I'll become a useless everything else, and yet that manager was just specifically speaking about the football. So being able to discern between the two and ask questions out of curiosity and ask questions as a curious detective will be very, very helpful. Finally, the 5th one, take notes and reflect later. I know that this is a tough thing to do when someone is giving you feedback out of frustration and you say, hold on a second, let me take note of that. It's not necessarily natural, But then ultimately, if you do the pause that we're speaking about, this doesn't only just calm you down to be able to respond, it also calms them down. If they're frustrated and they're realizing that you're actually taking this with a calm character, they will also calm down. And if you start asking questions, not questions of trying to frustrate them, questions of curiosity, thank you for the feedback. Where do you think I could actually improve? And they see that, oh, okay, this person is actually interested in my feedback. The conversation will completely change. Now, what's the point in getting that valuable information and not noting it somewhere for you to be able to reflect, which is the importance of the fifth part? Note it down, reflect, and implement it for the next time. Because the last thing you want to do is to be criticized or given the same feedback over and over again about the same act, because that means you're not learning. That's the typical example of insanity, where you're doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That's the end of our video today, guys. Hopefully this is something that you found useful. And as mentioned at the start, if you find any of this useful for yourself or for someone else, please feel free to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, and share it with as many people as you think might find this useful. And we will see you again next time. Take care, guys. Bye.